I had prepared a little bit of a deeper look into romantic compatibility for this evening. And we're not going to talk about how compatible some types are, whatnot, but we're actually talking about the individual components relating to romantic compatibility. So, why is that? Well, it's because I keep getting these YouTube comments talking about compatibility, and everyone is just zeroing in on, uh, compatibility from a nature standpoint and, the golden pairs, which I don't mind people zeroing in on golden pairs because golden pairs still at the end of the day are ultimately the ideal. However, based on nurtural changes within the mind, etc., and how people perceive things differently, it goes way beyond that. The reason, so like for example, uh, yeah, our cognitive functions can match all the way across, but why is it? Why is it that from, when we talk about social compatibility, as stated in season 12, we did season 12, we talked about social compatibility. Why is it the third highest social compatibility is actually the most common, the most common marriage, for example, right? So just because, like from a relationship standpoint, your golden pair is your golden pair, that does not necessarily mean that's what someone is going to naturally pick for like a life partner, for example, or what their marriage is, etc. With romantic compatibility, like just like marriage is so much more than just like raw functions going across the board. And I was planning on talking about this like about 6 months ago, but we ran into an issue with people taking our intellectual property, and we decided, to go against that, and then we just went with the golden pairs, basically. But we need to talk about things beyond the golden pairs. So, for example, why is it ENTPs often get married to ISFPs? Why do ENTPs get married to INFJs? Why do INTPs end up with ENFJs? Why do INTJs end up with ENFPs, right? We have a lot of these different questions that, wait a minute, their functions don't exactly line up. Why is that? But that's a whole nother story entirely. But the point is that they found each other. They my INFJ uncle, mind you, they found each other, and they ended up having a really successful relationship. Yes, it had its ups and downs, uh, but they had a very successful relationship. They had 3 children. They were together for, shoot, I don't know, 50 years, something like that. It's just an insane number that they were together. And they were able to just really make that relationship work. And well, how is that even possible? Well, it's because romantic compatibility goes outside of what people would consider a traditional golden pair. While a golden pair, and I hope you guys can hear me properly here. So while a golden pair is definitely the ideal match, and then obviously you have the second highest compatibility. So like for example, take an ISTP, their highest match is an ESTJ, but an ISTJ would certainly work as well. I have known an ISTJ ISTP couple, another couple in my family. They've been together since they've been in second grade, and and they've just known each other for that long, and now they're like 40 years old and have 3 children. A very successful relationship. It's had its ups and downs, but still very successful. Statistically over the way. But beyond just those standard social compatibility rules, there's like a lot more because yes, we want our functions to line up, but then you got to think about priority. You break down a golden pair compatibility, and all it is highest emotional compatibility plus highest sexual compatibility, perceptual compatibility, right? Where people experience sexuality, where they experience beauty, where they experience nobility. That's all based on the perception functions, perceiving functions. We want perceiving functions to max. That's why I maintain that perceiving functions versus emotional compatibility, decision-making functions. So perceiving functions equals sexual compatibility, and then you have emotional compatibility equals decision-making functions. Which one is more important? Honestly, it's the sexual compatibility. They're way more important in every way. It's just because you just can't get away from that human instinct. The human instinct is there, and it's important, and it's not going away. It doesn't matter how emotionally connected you can get really to somebody. It still matters technically slightly more than emotional compatibility. So when I've been doing a lot of coaching, I've been coaching relationships like ENTP ISTJ, right? And that's been a very difficult pair to teach or keeps these relationships together. It's just insane sheer loyalty that comes from SI hero and SI inferior, and then at least NI nemesis. If the ENFP is shadow focused, the relationship can work because the NI nemesis can kind of become that ally to the NI hero and like provide enough desire for any inferior to be okay-ish enough. But the problem is then you have SE demon that doesn't exactly help. So, but then again, SE nemesis can also compensate as a result. So there's a lot of different ways, when you think of romantic compatibility, just compensating. But that's not why the decision is made. So if you zoom out from the cognitive functions, yes, we have FE likes to eat FI, and TE likes to eat TI, and then you have NE likes to eat NI, and so on and so forth within cognitive synchronicity theory, according to season 5 that we have. Yes, that's a thing. But you can actually zoom out and realize that there's a lot more benefits to be gained from certain types. Look at it this way. Interaction styles, temperaments. Control types need to be with movement types. Direct types need to be with informative types. Initiating need to be with responding types. Okay? So from an interaction style standpoint, you want the opposite for your relationship. But wait a minute, golden pair, ENTP, INTJ, you have direct informative, that's great, but then you have movement. Wait a minute, that's not necessarily the best. So even with your golden pair, for example, there's still advantages and disadvantages all the way across the board. There's still advantages and disadvantages. And like, so like with disadvantages and advantages, it goes even further, like temperaments. Here's a problem with, again, ENTP, INTJ relationships, speaking about my own golden pair. Here's the other issue with it. It's double systematic. It's completely systematic. Where's the interest? Why is having interest so important? This is why ENTPs, for example, often marry INFJs. Very often. They're getting those perceiving function compatibility just fine. There isn't very much high emotional compatibility, but at least the FE child can hang out with the FI critic. At least the TI child can hang out with the TE critic, because a little kid can hang out with the grandparent just fine. So at least they have that kind of emotional compatibility, and it works. But they're gaining the advantage of the fact that the idealist is an interest-based type. So it really becomes, wait a minute, pick your poison. So when you're looking at romantic compatibility, it ultimately comprises of 3 separate things. Cognitive functions, okay? So cognitive functions for cognitive synchronicity. So cognitive synchronicity is 1. The second one is interaction styles and temperaments, and where they match. And then the third thing is nurture, human nurture. Super important. Now remember, human beings and relationships is a Venn diagram of 2 different things. Okay, so it's a Venn diagram. Okay, so you have nature, you have nurture. Okay, and they come together, and in the middle you have the human being, right, within this Venn diagram. So that means nature versus nurture really only makes up about 60 up to 60% of the equation with a person. And it really depends what a person has been through. It really depends. So with that being said, how does that work? When you have a situation where nurture and support. What makes up the nurtural components? Like, so how do you determine nurture? King, warrior, magician, lover, queen, mother, matron, lover. These indices make up a person's nurture. Biblically speaking, and I know I use biblical concepts all the time, but there's a verse that says, "Do not become unequally yoked." Right? Do not be unequally yoked. That's super important. I cannot stress how important it is to not be unequally yoked. And this applies directly to the nurture side, not the nature side. This is the nurture side. Do not be unequally yoked. So when you're thinking about having a long-term relationship with somebody, or a long-term sexual relationship, or even a marriage and whatnot, you really want to look at, okay, am I equally yoked with this person, right? Super important. So, like, if you're a man, like, what's your king ability, right? I mean, so like when you give when you're a man, you've completed king officially when you have your own place, your own car, your own job, your own budget, your own plan for removing and eliminating debt, and you have your own, basically your own wedding ring created, understood. It's your signet ring. It represents your crown. It's like the crowning achievement, right? And this is assuming traditional masculine feminine relationships outside of homosexuality, of course. But again, if we are going to talk about homosexuality, you can kind of apply the same concept. Just understand that when we're talking about like what I presented in season 17, episode 4, talking about how some types of triple feminine, triple masculine, and they have these different approaches to gender. Obviously, in a homosexual relationship, one person would take on the feminine roles based on human nurture, and one would take the masculine roles, for example, and that's perfectly natural. And during their relationship, those roles may switch back and forth, or per situation within the relationship, they switch temporarily. So again, from a homosexual standpoint, it still applies. So I'm not saying that it's just for regular relationships.
Is that why I'm cooking with SE Demon?
Hey, I cook with SE Demon all the time. Yep. So I'm probably gonna be doing it tonight. It's so hot. You could just see the sweat forming on my face. My gosh. So it goes even more. When you have you don't want to be unequally yoked. So from king, warrior, magician, lover standpoint, you got your ring, you finished king. Warrior means you're taking care of your health. You would obviously want to be with somebody who's at the same range of health for you. You'd also want to have someone who would appreciate your level of king, right? You would also want to be with someone who has strong relationships with their own gender, because you should be having strong relationships with your own gender through a magician, right? And then obviously you would want to have someone that enjoys life at the same level as you do. If they are not very experienced in things, it's probably because you yourself are not experienced in things. But from like a king, warrior, magician, lover standpoint, you want to have each level within each of the 4 archetypes, the mature masculine, the mature feminine, to be about the same or very close to each other, right? That's why we're releasing something in the future that goes into details to what that means. But the point is that eventually we'll get to a point where we can actually measure out what that is, what that means. And then through those measurements, you can actually basically measure your nurture in relation to what other people have. And that could be with fellow men, fellow women. It could be people that you're trying to have relationships with. That's fine, right? So romantic compatibility, there's so many more variables to keep track of. Now, golden pairs, they're the default. Yeah, they're the ideal technically. Because if you think from a primary versus secondary yin and yang equilibrium, okay? Because everything is primary, secondary, yin and yang within psychology, everything. Your ego is primary, your shadow is secondary to your ego. You always have that at all times. And that's always, you're never going to get away from that. So with that being said, while cognitive synchronicity, it is primary. Temperaments, interaction styles, it's secondary. It really is. It's still important, you know. And then you look at human nurture, it's like even tertiary to a point, right? Going down to different levels in terms of levels of importance, right? So yeah, golden pairs are important, and yes, but they're the default. They're like the starting point of compatibility in the middle, and then people branch out from there and develop their relationships from there, based on each according to their own need and desire, etc. And there's not much that we can do uh, to get around that. There just isn't. Uh, so why is that relevant? It's relevant because if you're not able to get in a relationship with a golden pair, that does not necessarily mean that's a bad thing. Because, for example, oh, I forgot. So, cognitive synchronicity, temperance interaction styles. Oh, there's a third point in there, the third one, and then the fourth one is actually the nurture part with King Warrior Magician Lover. The third one is also what we call, gosh, what is it called again? I want to say cognitive focus, and yes, another glossary term, LOL. But let me define it right now. Let me actually define it right now. So cognitive focus is basically what side of the mind a person is focused on the most, using the most. And just because you're an INTJ doesn't mean that you're not focused on having that ESFP. So you can be an ESFP flavored INTJ, or you can be an ENTP flavored INTJ, right? It's kind of like you're playing a video game and your class is INTJ, but your prestige class is an ESFP, for example. It's the same thing. So whatever your cognitive focus is, whatever your focus of which side of the mind is, it can cause things differently. So look at it this way. From a romantic compatibility standpoint, when you're looking at focus, you really want to have one person who's subconscious focused. They're very happy, but they may not be the most mature person in the world. That's important. We'll discuss why. And then you want someone who is very mature, but not necessarily as happy, and shadow focused or unconscious focused for the relationship. This is very important. Very, very important. So it's important because when you look at human nurture, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, the lover archetype, for example, how are you going to enjoy life? The technically more immature person, but because they're immature, they're kind of more happier in life. They have a lot more to offer in terms of experiencing life because they're just experiencing life. They're Taylor Swifting it. You know what I'm saying? They're just Taylor Swifting it like crazy. But that Taylor Swift, definitely needs some solid ground to stand on. Someone who's super mature that she can come home to, that's not going to abandon her and just be that solid ground and that foundation for her. But then she also shares those fun experiences with that super mature person so they don't miss out on life either, while simultaneously Taylor Swift is safe, not making new songs about ex-boyfriends every 10 minutes, and might be singing about the fact that her trip to Yosemite with her actually mature lover, how great it was, etc. Yeah, but that's why. So when you think from a romantic compatibility standpoint, keep that in mind. It's another index as to how romantic compatibility is calculated. So we have these 4 different ways, and each of them, when you bring them together, creates romantic compatibility. It's 4 pillars, the 4 pillars of romantic compatibility. Yes, cognitive synchronicity is number 1 most important thing. Yes, temperaments and interaction styles matter is number 2 thing. Number 3 thing is cognitive focus, and the 4th thing, oh wait, that's 5. And the 4th thing really, really is hey, what's our nurture? The king, warrior, magician, lover, queen, mother, matron, lover, etc. It all applies. Each of these things really come into play when it comes to uh, romantic relationships. They have different needs done. So it's funny because the SFJ is still systematic like the NTP is, right? And it's also like the ENTP is. It's still movement oriented like the ENTP is. It's still within the same quadra as the ENTP, right? So it has all of those things with it. It's still informative. It still has the exact same interaction style, even that I had before, right? The difference is the temperament. Concrete, yes, it technically should go with the abstract, just like movement should go with control. The difference is that based on a person's nurture, each human being actually ends up valuing these things differently. One human being who she values informative, right? She also values movement. She values systematic. So each person, they value certain traits of an interaction style and certain traits of a temperament, which actually causes them to preferentially naturally seek out a different type than other people. So people value different things.
Hey,
So
Chase, I have a question.
yes, sir.
So let's say ISFJ has ENTP subconscious, correct? ISFJ.
Yes.
So say for me, as INTJ, ENTP is the golden pair. So what if there is a person who mostly lives in her subconscious, so in her ENTP? Would it be the same relationship with her? Well, will it be similar to true ENTP who whose ego is ENTP versus ISFJ who mostly lives as ENTP? Do you see my question?
Yeah, there's a difference. So like depending on what your cognitive focus is, again, it's a different flavor of a different type. I'm gonna be doing a lecture on this in the future. But so like we were saying in like prestige classes, I mean, and the classes are important because if you guys have been paying any, it just became a competition, right? Or if someone who's subconscious focused, who can have more fun? Who can be happier, right? That's another problem. So you guys have to understand that, you know, cognitive focus really, really matters. So romantic compatibility, while your golden pair is definitely your ideal in terms of cognitive synchronicity, it may not be enough to cover all the bases that you yourself are looking for. Because the bases really include your cognitive focus. The bases really include your cognitive synchronicity, of course, that's very primary. It's a very primary thing. But you're willing to sacrifice emotional compatibility in some cases. You still have your sexual compatibility within your cognitive synchronicity, but then you're sacrificing. Maybe you need some more control in your life because your life is just too chaotic because you're a movement type. You don't know what to do. So you need someone who's very controlled. So Mr. Matthew here said he's in a relationship with an ENTJ, and he's gaining the benefits of having control from an ENTJ, even though he's a movement type, even though his golden pair is an INFJ, which is another movement type. So perhaps in his life, he needs more order because it's just what he needs based on past experiences of his SI inferior. And then as a result of that, he's getting that control from an ENTJ relationship, right? And this could be from, a lot of various, aspects. So romantic compatibility is extremely complicated. It's extremely complicated. You have to keep track of these 4 different pillars when you're understanding, okay, how relationships actually work. It can be tracked. And yes, I have developed mathematics around being able to keep track of it, to come to an understanding as to which relationship is really going to work and how to identify what person values what. And it's really complicated process. It can be done. But again, like, and don't forget, like the fourth pillar we talked about, which is nurture. If you're not, nurture is like the most complicated part, but it's also the most important, because don't be unequally yoked. You can have your cognitive focus handled. You can have your cognitive synchronicity handled. You can have what you're looking for in interaction styles and temperaments. But if you have incompatible nurture, it's just not going to work still. And this is why you still end up having successful marriages between ENFJ, INFJ, for example, my aunt and uncle, or between Jeff and his wife, ENFP, ISFJ, and or in some cases ENTP, ISTJ. These kinds of relationships that overvalue emotional compatibility, but because they've had these lives where they're looking over their shoulder all the time, they need somebody who's very safety oriented, like they are, for example, because their nurture demands it, or because they don't want to be unequally yoked. Here's an example of someone of an unequally yoked relationship. You have a man who is 250 pounds, and he just happens to be with a woman who's 95 pounds, for example. That's an example of unequal yokedness right there. And that could be a source of conflict, as well as a source of judgments, unfair judgments, and pain within the relationship. Do not be unequally yoked. Nurture matters. It's very hard to calculate. I do have a way to do it, but it's difficult. Let's move down. Does a balanced person need a balanced person? No, not necessarily. It really depends on what they value, because you could have a balanced person, nurturally speaking. You could have a very integrated person, here and there. But remember, everyone is still working to develop their superego at the end of the day, which means there's still work to be done in their shadows and their subconscious on both sides. They still need a lot of work in those areas in their minds to be able to get their superego. The thing is too, is that if someone else in a relationship, and you got cognitive synchronicity, you got compatibility going on, you got cognitive focus, you got temperaments and interaction styles locked down based on what you want, the nurture's going pretty well, but you're very integrated and they're not as integrated as you, they'll integrate faster because of it, if you're more patient. It really comes down to your own decision based on how patient you are, right? So keep that in mind. That is a very serious approach. Letter dichotomy tests like the MBTI are bullshit. This is why people even struggle so much trying to use the type grid to type people, because there's just so much more information, right?
So kind of as a follow-up to that then, so like an ENFP that is focused on, let's say, creating a new tradition, for example, would have that traditionalist tendency from ISTJ subconscious, but since they're still a base future thinker, that's where that would kind of play in, as an example.
Yes. That was a yes or no, right?
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, Helen Shang, did you say, or Shang, sorry, did you say both subconscious focused golden pair works fine, or it's a nightmare? It can be a problem. When you have people in a golden pair who are the same cognitive focus, it usually almost always leads to conflict. Okay. So look at it this way. Hollywood, how much Hollywood drama is there really? Hollywood actors typically are in their subconscious, statistically. 80% of them, they're subconscious focused. Okay. And when they get in relationships with each other, it almost ends up being like this tabloid news story, divorce super quick, like Kid Rock getting with Pamela Anderson, LOL, right? Let's be honest. They're both subconscious focused. And not appropriate, right? But then you look at those people who are in relationships with people that are not celebrities, and those non-celebrities, they're very shadow focused. and then they end up doing really well in their relationships. And that's been consistent over time. It's kind of funny though, if you've noticed that the celebrities that don't get news coverage about their relationships are the ones who have that figured out. They're with shadow focused people who are there drawing upon the maturity of the shadow focused people versus the subconscious focus, right? Very important to understand. So if you're in a golden pair or looking to have a golden pair, identify your own focus, find out what their focus is so that you know. It's very important. All right, next question. Let's see here. Okay. Oh, there's just comments. Okay, cool. Awesome. Coming up on our 1 hour here for the conference. Cool. So remember, folks, 4 pillars of romantic compatibility. Cognitive synchronicity is number 1, and it is primary. Cognitive functions and whether or not you have, and then underneath that cognitive synchronicity umbrella, you have emotional compatibility and sexual compatibility. Sexual compatibility equals perception functions. Emotional compatibility equals decision-making functions. That's pillar number 1. Pillar number 2, okay? Pillar number 2 is, and we'll actually call this, conference, the 4 pillars of romantic compatibility, and put it up on our website, available to the Ruby patrons for that. The second one is your temperaments and interaction styles, knowing which ones you value, knowing which ones they value, and seeking out those. For example, I value someone who's interest-based and control, right? That's, I really need those things, right? For example, from a temperament standpoint, interaction style standpoint, I need someone who's direct, right? Like those are my preferences, right? So when you look at, so always understand, you know, what your preferences or what their preferences or what someone else's preferences are from a temperament interaction style. And that's the second pillar. The third pillar is cognitive focus, which we discussed at length. And the fourth pillar is their nurture, which is where your king, warrior, magician, lover as a man rests, and where their queen, mother, matron, lover is as a woman, to the point where you are not what we call unequally yoked. The goal of pillar 4 is to become equally yoked. And these are the 4 pillars of romantic compatibility. Awesome. And since we are now at the end of our conference, I would like to take the next couple minutes for anyone to have any questions that they would like me to answer.
Jason, you talked about domains.
Yes.
Of interaction. Which of the 4 did those follow, or did the domains fall under? Or is it separate?
It actually applies to all 4 pillars, actually. Okay. Because domains can manifest from each of the 4 pillars. Because like you look neutrally speaking, you know, when you're looking at king versus queen, who has the responsibility of being the breadwinner? Whose domain is that, for example, right? That's very neutral focused. You know, cognitive synchronicity wise, you know, whose role is what in the bedroom, right? Or, you know, like different domains apply to different pillars. Awesome.
Okay.
I was just gonna say it kind of sucks for the abstracts because you're trying to find somebody now that's subconscious or shadow focused and being rare as hell.
That's true. But the thing is, think about it this way though. It's actually a good thing because the way our brains are, it just goes to show that you really can have a relationship with just about anybody, depending upon the circumstances. While our minds are pre-programmed to have certain preferences, and those preferences are important, there's all these backdoor mechanisms, backup mechanisms to allow for human beings to basically have the opportunity to have really good relationships with people. And that way the race continues to propagate. Because if no one wanted to be in a relationship with each other, outside of, then I guess we'd stop having children altogether. It's just hard coded into our minds to make sure that we still can have healthy relationships with just about anyone. Even if it's a high camaraderie relationship, it's still possible. Can I get the logo as a tattoo, or would I get sued? All right, cool. Well, it's good to see you folks. Thank you all for being